There is a particular kind of silence that arrives before understanding. It is not the silence of peace, nor the silence of ignorance. It is the silence that follows an internal hesitation, a pause in which something within you registers unease, long before the intellect assembles an explanation. You may recall such moments: a conversation that was perfectly civil, yet left a faint aftertaste of discomfort. A gesture that appeared generous, yet felt oddly transactional. A person whose presence seemed impressive, articulate, even admirable, and yet somehow destabilizing. Most people dismiss these impressions. They are inconvenient. They resist clear articulation. They challenge the comforting belief that intelligence and eloquence are reliable indicators of virtue. The Stoic philosophers, however, took such moments with great seriousness. They understood that the gravest dangers to one's inner life rarely announce themselves with cruelty or excess. More often, they arrive well-dressed, well-spoken, and apparently reasonable. Marcus Aurelius warned that the human mind is most vulnerable not when it is threatened, but when it is flattered. This reflection begins precisely there, not with fear nor accusation, but with clarity. Because clarity, in the Stoic tradition, is not merely intellectual, it is moral. And moral clarity, once achieved, alters the way one moves through the world forever. The illusion of civility. Civilization places great faith in manners. We trust composure. We trust refinement. We trust the ability to speak calmly, persuasively, at length. Yet the Stoics were careful to distinguish civility from virtue. Seneca observed that polished behavior often conceals inner disorder more effectively than outright brutality. A person who shouts reveals themselves quickly. A person who smiles while undermining you may take years to understand. This is why the most harmful individuals are rarely those who appear openly hostile. They are those who seem reasonable. They present themselves as thoughtful. They express concern. They appear to listen carefully. And in doing so, they lower defenses. The first disturbance of the mind. Consider how these encounters usually begin. There is an immediate sense of recognition, as though you have met someone unusually perceptive. They mirror your values. They articulate thoughts you have not yet expressed. They appear, almost miraculously, aligned with your frustrations, ambitions, and beliefs. This produces relief. To be understood is one of the most powerful human desires. The Stoics knew this well and warned that it could be exploited. Epictetus taught that before you give assent to any impression, you must examine it. Not everything that feels familiar is benign. Not everything that resonates is true. The danger lies in speed. The faster trust is established, the less time reason has to observe. Charm without weight. Some individuals possess what might be called social fluency. They adapt effortlessly. They read rooms intuitively. They speak with confidence, often with warmth, occasionally with wit. This can be deeply disarming. Yet the Stoics did not judge character by surface ease. They looked for weight, a consistency of conduct over time, across situations, especially when admiration was absent. Charm, when detached from principle, is light. It moves easily, but it does not anchor. Such individuals often require attention in subtle ways. They steer conversations. They reposition themselves at the center of narratives. They respond generously until they are not the focus. At first, this seems merely a feature of strong personality, but gradually, patterns emerge. Interruptions disguised as enthusiasm, opinions offered as conclusions, affection that cools when agreement falters. Marcus Aurelius advised observing not how a person behaves when things proceed according to their wishes, but how they respond when contradicted. This is where masks begin to slip. The Stoic measure of character. The Stoics measured character by 3 criteria: how a person treats those who cannot benefit them, how they behave when frustrated, how they speak when power is unnecessary. These moments reveal far more than polished introductions. A person of sound character does not require superiority to feel secure. They do not diminish others to affirm themselves. They do not experience disagreement as threat. When these qualities are absent, charm becomes a tool rather than an expression. And tools are not used for connection. They are used for control. The subtle absence of empathy. The second disturbance often arrives quietly. It may take the form of emotional misalignment. You share something of personal significance and receive analysis instead of understanding. You express difficulty and encounter impatience rather than care. You celebrate an achievement and sense competition where joy should reside. This absence is not always overt. It manifests as misattunement. The Stoics believed empathy was not sentimentality, but recognition, the rational acknowledgement that others experience reality as vividly as oneself. Marcus Aurelius wrote that human beings are formed for mutual assistance, like the upper and lower rows of teeth. To act otherwise is to act against one's nature. A person who lacks empathy does not register this bond. They may understand emotions intellectually, yet remain untouched by them morally. This distinction is crucial, because such individuals can discuss suffering without being moved by it. Emotional economy. Observe carefully how emotional exchange functions around them. Does attention flow primarily in one direction? Are their struggles granted gravity, while yours are reframed or reduced? Is your vulnerability met with interest or with information? Over time, an imbalance develops. You begin to listen more than you speak. You begin to explain yourself more than necessary. You begin to adjust your tone to avoid irritation. This is not coincidence. Seneca warned that when another's comfort requires your continual self-modification, something has gone wrong. Healthy relationships refine character. Unhealthy ones erode it. The cost to the inner life. Perhaps the most insidious effect is internal. You begin to hesitate. Before speaking, before disagreeing, before deciding. You rehearse, you anticipate reactions, you soften conclusions. The Stoics regarded this as a serious harm, not because conflict is pleasant, but because autonomy is sacred. Epictetus taught that while external circumstances may restrict the body, only we can surrender command of our own judgment. When you begin to preemptively limit yourself to maintain another's equilibrium, you have yielded something essential. The architecture of influence. Influence, when ethical, expands another's capacity to reason. Influence, when unethical, replaces it. Manipulative individuals are rarely forceful at first. They persuade by framing. They suggest rather than demand. They imply rather than insist. They guide rather than command. Yet the outcome is the same. Your choices increasingly align with their preferences. Your doubts increasingly mirror their concerns. Your boundaries increasingly appear negotiable. The Stoics cautioned that anything which undermines one's capacity to choose freely is a threat to the soul. Not dramatic, but corrosive. Why the intelligent are especially vulnerable. It is tempting to believe that intelligence offers protection. The Stoics disagreed. Intelligent people often rationalize what simpler minds reject outright. They search for nuance, context, justification. They interpret patterns as anomalies. They explain conduct as circumstance. They doubt themselves before doubting others. This generosity of interpretation, while admirable, can be exploited. Epictetus advised that philosophy begins when one stops lying to oneself. The first lie is usually this: I am imagining it. A culture that rewards appearance. In societies that prize confidence, fluency, and composure, these individuals often succeed. They are promoted, they are admired, they are trusted. The Stoics were not impressed. They judged success by alignment with reason, not applause. A person who rises by diminishing others has not ascended. They have merely changed position. The beginning of wisdom. Wisdom, in Stoic terms, does not begin with knowledge. It begins with attention. Attention to patterns, attention to internal signals, attention to the slow accumulation of unease. When something within you resists, despite logic's assurances, it deserves examination. Not panic, not accusation, examination. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed by the quality of its thoughts. To think clearly about others is therefore an act of self-preservation. Preparing the ground. This first reflection is not an indictment. It is an invitation to observe without haste, to withhold premature trust, to value consistency over intensity. In the next part, we will explore how influence matures into control, how guidance becomes domination, and how the erosion of autonomy often masquerades as care. The Stoics did not promise safety, they promised sight. And sight, once gained, cannot be surrendered without cost. Influence, when left unexamined, rarely remains influence for long. It matures, it consolidates, and eventually, it seeks permanence. The Stoics understood that the greatest threat to the inner life is not chaos, but gradual occupation. Not the sudden loss of freedom, but the slow redefinition of what freedom is allowed to look like. Control rarely arrives with force. It arrives with justification. When guidance becomes authority. At first, the presence of a decisive person can feel stabilizing. They appear confident where you hesitate, certain where you reflect, untroubled where you question. This contrast is seductive. Human beings, even thoughtful ones, grow weary of ambiguity. Someone who seems to possess clarity can feel like relief. Yet the Stoics were wary of borrowed certainty. Marcus Aurelius cautioned against surrendering one's judgment simply because another appears assured. Confidence is not wisdom. Volume is not truth. Gradually, advice begins to carry weight. Suggestions become expectations. Opinions begin to feel definitive. Alternatives are framed as naive or risky. The shift is subtle. You are not ordered, you are guided. But guidance that does not invite examination is not guidance at all. It is quiet authority. The narrowing of possibility. One of the clearest signs that influence has become control is contraction. Your world grows smaller. Certain conversations feel discouraged. Certain ambitions feel impractical. Certain relationships feel inconvenient. These limitations are rarely imposed directly. They are introduced as concern. That path will only complicate your life. You are better suited to something more realistic. Those people do not truly understand you. The Stoics would advise attention here. A person who respects your autonomy may disagree with your choices, but they do not seek to preempt them. Control operates by framing independence as danger. Dependency as a strategy. Control strengthens when dependency increases. This dependency need not be dramatic. It often appears as efficiency. One person manages the finances. One person handles decisions. One person knows how things work. At first, this arrangement seems practical. Over time, it becomes asymmetrical. You begin to consult where you once decided. You hesitate where you once acted. You defer where you once trusted yourself. Epictetus taught that freedom is not the absence of obligation, but the presence of choice. When choice disappears quietly, it is rarely mourned until it is needed. Surveillance of the mind. Perhaps the most effective form of control is not physical or logistical, but psychological. You become aware of being observed, not overtly, but internally. You edit your words before speaking. You anticipate reactions before making plans. You rehearse explanations that were never requested. This internal monitoring is learned behavior. Seneca observed that when fear becomes habitual, it no longer requires an external source. The mind becomes its own warden. This is not coincidence. Control is most stable when resistance feels unnecessary. Emotional leverage. When authority is questioned, emotional leverage often replaces reason. Appeals to loyalty emerge. Invocations of sacrifice are made. Responsibility is reassigned. After all I've done, you know how much this costs me. I never thought you would be this way. These statements are not invitations to dialogue. They are instruments of guilt. The Stoics made a sharp distinction between responsibility and manipulation. You are responsible for your actions. You are not responsible for another's refusal to regulate their emotions. Marcus Aurelius wrote that one person's agitation does not obligate another's surrender. The role of fear. Fear is the most efficient enforcer. Fear of loss, fear of disapproval, fear of instability. Control thrives when fear goes unnamed. You may tell yourself that compliance maintains peace, that resistance creates unnecessary conflict. But the Stoics were clear. Peace built on self-erasure is not peace. It is postponement. The manufacture of reality. When control is reinforced by deception, it approaches totality. Pathological dishonesty is not merely the telling of untruths. It is the construction of a private reality in which accountability dissolves. Events are reinterpreted, statements are denied, intentions are revised. And because this is done calmly, often convincingly, doubt is displaced. Not onto the deceiver, but onto yourself. Epictetus warned that when perception is destabilized, autonomy follows. A person uncertain of reality cannot act decisively within it. Why such deception persists. Pathological liars are rarely anxious. They speak fluidly. They maintain composure. They appear sincere. This is why they are believed. The Stoics did not equate sincerity with truth. They looked for coherence over time. Truth, they observed, does not require maintenance. Falsehood does. It must be adjusted, defended, and revised. Contradictions eventually appear, but only to those who observe patiently. The Stoic withdrawal of trust. The Stoic response to deception is not confrontation, it is recalibration. Trust is withdrawn quietly. Dependence is reduced. Expectations are adjusted. This is not punishment, it is accuracy. Seneca wrote that peace comes not from correcting others, but from no longer placing your stability in unreliable hands. The cost of endurance. Many endure such relationships far longer than reason would advise, not out of weakness, but investment, shared history, emotional labor, time already given. The Stoics recognized this impulse and cautioned against it. Endurance, they argued, is only virtuous when it serves principle. Otherwise, it is inertia disguised as loyalty. Past sacrifice does not justify future harm. Reclaiming internal authority. Authority begins internally. It is reclaimed not through confrontation, but through refusal. Refusal to explain endlessly, refusal to justify boundaries, refusal to abandon self-respect for comfort. This is where control weakens, not when it is challenged aggressively, but when it is starved of compliance. Boundaries as moral statements. A boundary, in Stoic terms, is not a demand. It is a declaration of reality. I will not participate in this. I will not accept this tone. I will not negotiate my values. A boundary does not argue. It stands. And this is precisely why controlling individuals react so strongly to them. Anger, dismissal, mockery. These reactions are diagnostic. A person who values connection will adapt. A person who values power will escalate. The quiet return of clarity. As boundaries hold, something subtle occurs. Your thoughts sharpen. Your hesitation fades. Your inner tension diminishes. You begin to recognize how much energy was spent managing someone else's equilibrium. The Stoics believed this energy belongs to reason. Once reclaimed, it restores perspective. Preparing for the deeper work. In the next reflection, we will turn inward. We will examine anger, resentment, and the temptation to become hardened. We will explore how Stoicism preserves sensitivity without surrender and dignity without withdrawal. Because the ultimate challenge is not surviving proximity to difficult people. It is doing so without allowing them to reshape who you are. There comes a moment, often unremarkable on the surface, when endurance quietly transforms into distortion. You are no longer merely tolerating difficulty. You are being reshaped by it. The Stoics regarded this moment with grave seriousness, not because suffering is novel, but because unexamined suffering alters character. And character, once altered, does not easily return to its former alignment. The seduction of hardness. When clarity finally arrives, it is frequently accompanied by anger. Anger at being misled, anger at wasted years, anger at one's own compliance. This anger can feel clarifying, even righteous. Yet the Stoics issued their sternest warnings here. Seneca wrote that anger is the one passion that disguises itself as virtue while corroding reason. It promises strength but delivers volatility. It feels decisive but produces blindness. An angry person believes they have regained power. In truth, they have merely exchanged submission for reactivity, and reactivity remains dependence. Why anger benefits the manipulator. Those who seek control are rarely disturbed by anger in others. They are disturbed by composure. Anger provides narrative. It allows them to appear calm, reasonable, and unjustly accused. It invites counteraccusation. It shifts focus from pattern to episode. The Stoics understood this dynamic intimately. Marcus Aurelius wrote that when you respond with agitation, you grant your adversary entry into your inner citadel. The Stoic alternative is not suppression. It is non-participation. Seeing without contempt. Stoicism does not ask you to excuse harm. It asks you to understand it without hatred. Hatred binds you to what you oppose. Understanding releases you from illusion. The Stoics believed that those who manipulate, dominate, or deceive are not formidable. They are fractured. They act from fear. They cling to control because they lack inner order. They grasp because they cannot govern themselves. This does not make them harmless, but it does make them comprehensible. And what is comprehended loses its mystique. Moral asymmetry and its weight. One of the quiet griefs of such encounters is asymmetry. You reflect, they deflect. You doubt, they assert. You feel, they calculate. This imbalance can feel deeply unjust. The Stoics did not deny this. They simply refused to interpret it as disadvantage. Epictetus taught that sensitivity is not fragility, it is awareness. And awareness, properly disciplined, becomes discernment. The task is not to become less sensitive. It is to become less governable by sensitivity. The restoration of self-trust. Prolonged exposure to manipulation erodes confidence in one's own perception. You ask others to confirm what you see. You apologize for instincts. You mistrust clarity. The Stoics regarded this as the most serious injury, because once judgment is outsourced, freedom follows. Restoration does not come through reassurance. It comes through practice. Small acts of alignment. You act according to reason, not reassurance. You hold a boundary, without explanation. You endure discomfort, without retreat. Each act rebuilds authority, not externally, internally. The Stoic use of discomfort. Modern culture treats discomfort as failure. The Stoics treated it as information. Discomfort reveals attachment. It exposes fear. It highlights dependency. When you feel compelled to explain yourself to someone who consistently misuses explanation, pause. Ask, what am I protecting? Truth or approval? Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul grows stronger by refusing unnecessary concessions, remaining just without becoming severe. A common fear arises here. If I withdraw, will I become cold? If I disengage, will I lose compassion? The Stoics addressed this directly. Justice, they argued, is not emotional softness. It is proportional response. You owe others fairness, not access. You owe understanding, not endurance. You owe civility, not surrender. Compassion without discernment becomes self-neglect. Discernment without compassion becomes cruelty. Stoicism demands both. Living among the unreasonable. The Stoics never imagined a world free of difficult people. Marcus Aurelius governed one. Their philosophy was forged not in retreat, but in proximity. They advised preparation, not avoidance. Expect interference, expect misunderstanding, expect self-interest. But do not be surprised by it. Surprise weakens judgment. Preparedness preserves it. The discipline of inner assent. At the heart of Stoicism lies a simple practice. You do not control what occurs. You control what you assent to. A thought arises. They have ruined my peace. Pause. Is peace something another can seize, or something you have relinquished? The Stoics trained themselves to interrogate impressions relentlessly, not to deny emotion, but to refuse its authority. When silence is strength. In a world enamored with response, restraint appears passive. The Stoics knew better. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is sovereignty. It deprives manipulation of fuel. It denies distortion an audience. It protects clarity. Silence is not avoidance. It is selection. You choose where to place your energy and where not to. The space that follows. When you cease participation in emotional theater, something unfamiliar appears: space. At first, it feels unsettling. You were accustomed to vigilance, to managing tone, to anticipating reactions. Now, there is quiet. The Stoics recognize this quiet as restoration, a return to self-command. In this space, you rediscover preferences unshaped by fear. You remember who you were before adaptation became survival. The ethical demand of clarity. Clarity carries obligation. Once you see manipulation, you cannot unsee it. You become responsible for what you tolerate, not out of moral superiority, but integrity. Integrity, for the Stoics, was coherence between belief and conduct. Where these diverge, unease persists. In the final part, we will draw these threads together. We will consider power without corruption, compassion without exposure, and how to move through the world neither naive nor hardened. We will end not with warning, but with standard. A quiet, demanding standard the Stoics believed every rational person owed themselves. There is a point at which clarity ceases to feel revelatory and begins to feel settled. Not triumphant, not vindicated, simply precise. You no longer search for explanations. You no longer seek permission to trust what you see. You understand, without urgency, that some dispositions are not accidents of circumstance, but expressions of character. The Stoics regarded this understanding as a form of adulthood. Compassion without self-betrayal. One of the most persistent confusions among reflective people is the belief that compassion requires proximity, that to understand another's motives is to remain within reach of their influence. The Stoics rejected this entirely. Marcus Aurelius wrote that one may act with goodwill toward others while refusing to be shaped by them. Compassion, properly understood, is not exposure. It is accuracy. You may recognize another's wounds. You may acknowledge their history. You may even feel sympathy for their condition, and still choose distance. This is not hardness. It is proportion. The error of endless tolerance. Endurance, in Stoic thought, is not an unconditional virtue. It serves wisdom, or it degrades it. To tolerate what erodes character is not patience. It is negligence toward oneself. Seneca warned that people often mistake familiarity for obligation. Time invested becomes justification. Habit replaces judgment. But the Stoics insisted, past endurance does not sanctify present harm. The standard is not how long you have endured, but whether endurance remains aligned with reason. Becoming difficult to govern. The Stoic aim was never invulnerability. It was independence, not from others, but from internal compulsions. Manipulation relies on predictable needs: the need to be approved of, the need to be understood, the need to be reassured. When these needs govern conduct, autonomy weakens. The Stoics trained themselves to loosen these attachments, not to become indifferent, but to become self-directed. A person who does not require validation cannot be easily coerced. A person who does not fear disapproval cannot be easily steered. This is quiet power. Reputation as an external. One of Stoicism's most unsettling teachings is this: your reputation is not yours. It exists entirely beyond your command. To sacrifice integrity for reputation is therefore irrational. Epictetus taught that if someone misrepresents you unjustly, the injury lies not in their words, but in your response. If the claim is false, it is harmless. If it is true, it is instructive. In neither case is panic required. This perspective dissolves one of manipulation's strongest tools. Power and the final test of character. When clarity returns, power returns with it. The power to disengage, the power to refuse, the power to define terms. The Stoics warned that this is the final trial, not whether you can endure injustice, but whether you can resist the temptation to replicate it. The urge to humiliate, the urge to dominate, the urge to win. Victory, in Stoic terms, was never reversal of hierarchy. It was freedom from the hierarchy itself. The discipline of non-retaliation. Retaliation appears decisive. It is, however, entangling. To retaliate is to remain engaged on terms not of your choosing. The Stoics practice something far more radical: non-retaliation without resentment. This does not mean submission. It means withdrawal of emotional participation. No argument to distort, no anger to provoke, no explanation to weaponize. Silence, when deliberate, is not absence. It is closure. Living with open eyes and steady nerves. Stoicism does not restore innocence. It replaces it with discernment. You still encounter charm, but you wait for consistency. You still hear conviction, but you observe behavior. You still feel emotion, but you do not enthrone it. This is not distrust, it is calibration. The Stoics believed bitterness was a sign of unresolved attachment. When expectation dissolves, bitterness follows. The quiet standard you set. When you govern yourself well, you alter the environment around you. Some withdraw, some resist, some adapt. You do not announce your standards, you embody them. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the most effective correction is example. A composed refusal teaches more than 100 arguments. Stoicism as an ethical practice. This philosophy was never merely personal, it was civic. How you conduct yourself informs what others believe to be acceptable. When you decline manipulation calmly, you establish precedent. When you refuse to reward deception, you clarify norms. This is moral influence without coercion. What remains? When you are no longer preoccupied with defense, something remains: attention, energy, presence. You invest these deliberately in relationships that do not require vigilance, in work that does not demand self-betrayal, in thought that does not revolve around avoidance. This is not retreat, it is selection. A final reflection. If you have remained with this reflection to its conclusion, you are not merely consuming information. You are engaging in examination. That, the Stoics believed, is the highest use of the mind. If these ideas have sharpened your perception, consider remaining in dialogue with them, not out of loyalty, but resonance. If you believe such reflections deserve wider circulation, a simple signal of appreciation sustains their visibility. And if there is one person whose discernment you respect, someone with whom such ideas would deepen conversation, sharing this reflection may prove more valuable than you expect. Should you choose to leave a comment, let it be considered, not for display, but as acknowledgement of inquiry undertaken seriously. The Stoics believed wisdom does not spread through volume, but through recognition. Thank you for lending this reflection your attention. And remember, You may not govern the dispositions of others, but you are always responsible for the governance of your own mind.